Hello, Brian. Hello, Karl.
Hi,
Howdy.
Hayley. Hi, Karl. Karl, thank you for
Morning.
joining us. Hayley, as I think you know, Karl is a longtime friend of Ray's and mine. We've known each other since 1991 when Ray and I moved to Atlanta. And Karl is certainly on the path of the hero as he makes his journey and always has been. And I thought he'd be a wonderful guest and that you could get us going in a conversation, Hayley.
I'm very excited, and the way that you introduced Karl was super fun. So I think we're gonna have a lot of fun today. So as Brian mentioned, Karl, we usually talk about our path and how, you know, our very unique personal experience seems to be similar, although unique across the way. And just to get started, sort of, what are the highlights of your path so far?
Yeah, growing up, we went to the Episcopal Church in New Jersey and then in Houston, and it never rang true for me. I didn't feel anything. I enjoyed the quiet time sitting there, and I don't remember a single sermon that I got anything out of. And actually found out last night from a cousin how my mother came to Episcopal. Her father, my grandfather, was a builder in Connecticut, contractor, and he put a bid in on a Episcopal church for their roof. And they said, "We like your bid, but we're going to give it to a parishioner." He said, "I'll join." And so that's how much he felt the pull. But I, for a long time, exploring spirituality and not sure what that meant, and really didn't find stuff. In Atlanta, tried a couple churches and really didn't ring true. And then in 2004, I went to what was then the Church of Religious Science of Atlanta, and friends for 15 years had been telling me I should go. And so I finally went, someone invited me, and I was thrilled to have the pastor from the stage in the introduction talk about God loves you even if you're gay. And I never expected to hear that from a pulpit. And I've hardly missed a service since then. And along the way, became a practitioner, went through 5 years of classes and training to be trained to pray with people. And I love that. It is really a joy. I've always enjoyed helping people, but I've never seen something like a spiritual mind treatment, a prayer that can change someone's life in an instant when the whole area of faith, I don't know what you call it, is called New Thought. And the idea is if you can get a new thought, you can start a new direction. And people who are really stuck, who just feel like they're at a dead end and there's no way out, and you get them to think a new thought, and again, their whole demeanor changes in an instant. It's really, really very powerful.
Who are you praying to?
God.
As in the more Christian-like God?
No.
No.
A God that God is in me, that I am a son of God as much as Jesus was, that God is here, and that God is not an old man, angry old man in the sky. God is love, joy, beauty, abundance, wisdom, all this. And that's been a real education for me, to see God that way, and a much more personal and approachable sense, and really to get that sense of God is in me. I don't have to go anywhere. I'm whole and complete right here, right now, just as I am. I've found very powerful.
Go ahead.
In terms of Jesus, my feeling is that Jesus is the exemplar of science of mind. And the prayers that were taught come from the Bible, where Jesus would say, this is so, thank you, and that's it. He didn't ask for anyone, he just said, this is it. And people were healed, changed from just his declaration.
Mm-hmm. The faith or the knowing.
Mm-hmm. Knowing.
Karl, talk a little bit, if you would, with Hayley about how your childhood has impacted your life.
How many hours do we have?
Endless.
No, yeah. Like a lot of gay kids, I didn't feel like I fit in. I really don't think my mother or father really knew what to do with me. They both had bad experiences with siblings, male siblings and male parents, and so they really didn't know what to do with me. And so there's a large part of me that really raised myself because no one was really looking out for me. So it's taken a long time. My mom just died the end of October, and coming to understand, and my dad died in 2009, and with both their deaths, really understanding how much they did give in their own way.
Mm-hmm.
There's a spiritualist here in Fort Lauderdale who Brian knows well, August Gold, and she likes to tell a story about her brother. And when their grandmother passed, her brother asked August to channel their grandmother. She had some questions. So she did, as she does. And the brother asked, "Why did Dad, your son, beat me so?" And her response was, "He showed you love the way he was shown love."
Mm-hmm.
And that helped me have a much better understanding of my father, my mother as well.
And I think there's great peace in that too. I think when you can have that understanding, forgiveness even goes. It goes like it's an instant leap from having a question to having peace. And I think that sort of has with that new thought concept you were talking about earlier too.
Yeah. And then
Karl, you had a childhood infirmity that impacted you too.
Yeah.
Tell Hayley about that.
Yeah. When I was 3.5, I came down with Perthes hip. And in Perthes hip, the top of your femur, the biggest bone in your body, the blood vessel moves, so it starts to die off. And the first symptom of Perthes hip is intense pain. And as the dead bone is roughly rubbing against the inside of your joint. And I got in the car to go to my beloved nursery school. And when I went to get out, I couldn't get out. It hurt so much. And that day is seared into my mind, body, and psyche. And all my life, I've been avoiding anything that looks like pain to me, looks like it could be painful. And it took 3.5 years. At my 7th birthday, I got my first pair of regular shoes. And I had spent 3.5 years, half my life at that time, in a cast, braces, crutches, all that. And so I kind of feel one of my dharmas, I guess, is to feel not just cured, but healed of that experience, because it made me feel very isolated from other kids. I really wanted to just be a regular boy, and I wasn't a regular boy because I couldn't play and like everyone did and that. But I've been in 2005, I became aware that my body was still holding on to the posture that it had adopted. It found the posture using the heavy cast as a counterweight that minimized the pain in my body, and it just kind of froze there. And even though I was healed or cured, my body didn't know to relax, to let it out. And so I've spent the last 16 years consciously releasing that tension from my body, and I feel days away from it being out after 60 years in my body.
Do you get physical work too, or is it just mostly the spiritual?
You know, Rolfing was a big
Yeah.
thing, and I started. I thought there might be an adult re-onset of the Perthes hip. I was having some pain, and I read, and there's not that. But I started doing yoga, and I did yoga for 4.5 years, Bikram, the hot yoga,
Mhm.
and pulled a muscle. And I asked someone what to what I could do to loosen that up. I was surprised after 4.5 years of yoga that I had tightness in my body, and she suggested Rolfing. And so I went to a Rolfer. And what's interesting, just before I started going to the Rolfer, I was at a retreat from my spiritual center, and there was a medical intuitive, and I volunteered, and she had me walk a couple steps, and she said, "You're walking upside down." And then she changed it to "you're walking backwards," because I don't think she understood what walking upside down. I was walking on my feet. And uh, in the Rolfing, the Rolfer at one point had me walk around the room, and she said, "You're walking with your shoulders, not with your legs. Your body doesn't even know your legs are there."
Yeah.
And it took 2 years for me to understand that they were both saying the same thing. So I've been shifting weight down my body and onto the left side.
I think that's such an interesting trend because I think many of us walk with our shoulders, and anything below our pelvis is just like a tree trunk. We're very unaware that we have two legs and how important they are to the entire physical structure of our body.
One of the things that's been interesting to me is I get more sensation in my legs, more connection. I expected to, when I touch the ground, from my body, since I was touching the ground, what I didn't expect is the information I got back from stepping on the ground. I didn't expect that. I didn't expect that two-way communication.
Right. Interesting. And I mean, the hero's journey is always, I mean, it's never ending. So to hear 60 years of you working on this, it's just like, yep.
Yep. Yeah. Yeah.
It's just a little bit at a time, as much as you can deal with, and then you enjoy that for a bit, and then there's more.
One of I read Michael Singer's book, An Untethered Soul, and in reading that, the center of my spirituality became "it's all good," and that's a trite phrase, but what it allowed me to do when I first started, I said, "Okay, this has happened. Eventually, I'm going to see the good in it." And after maybe not even a month, I realized I don't have to see the good eventually. I just need to know it's good. And it's amazing how much bandwidth that freed up, because something happens. I'm not trying to figure out who's to blame. I'm not figuring out where it came from or anything like that. And that I'd spent a huge amount of energy doing that. And by saying it's all good, just it's forgiveness right in that moment of and laying them free and laying myself free. It's been.
Do you think that comes from the change in your relationship with God, from seeing God as this punisher if you do something wrong, into sort of an all omnipotent, loving God?
Yeah. And a huge part of that was gay. And growing up gay, one of the things that's different is if something happens at school, like you're bullied or someone says something, you can't go home to your parents. They didn't have that experience. So there's no one to talk to. There's no one, you're all by yourself. And the great fear is if your parents find out, they're going to disown you, throw you out, all that. And so that's how I thought God was as well, very condemning. And I really, before I even found the Center for Spiritual Living in 2004, I had come to peace with God doesn't make mistakes. Here, just like everybody else, and had really come to accept my gayness in front of God. But it really did, it expanded greatly when I really started to learn more about what God could be, and not having to be this judgmental old man.
Karl, you said in the beginning that your first experience with religious science was the minister saying that God loves you even if you're gay. I think the hero's journey as a gay person is to get to the point where you say, you know, God loves me because I'm gay, not even if. That sounds like, all right, we'll let you in the door, just, you know, even if you're gay.
Even if, I understand that. And I may not have what was said down memorized. I think it was, when I said it like that, I understood what you're saying. And so, but that wasn't how it struck me. That it was.
What makes you such a good listener, Karl? Everyone sees you as a great listener. Where does that come from?
That's my superpower. And I've been told I listen too well, hearing things that people didn't know that they were communicating. And to me, it comes from the Perthes hip, because when I had the cast from my middle of my back to my toes, I had to have help to do everything. To go to the bathroom, I had to have help. And I hated asking for help. So what I would do, I was listening to everything that was going on in the house, one, to know what's going on, but also to catch something that I could use as to trade for help. It was like, you know, I know this about you, and, you know, I need help. And so it was a little nefarious to some extent. But I think in the Perthes hip again, I couldn't do much. So an idea would come to mind. I'm very creative. And I just had to quickly say no, because I couldn't do it. And
do you think listening and creativity go together?
That's interesting. Not necessarily. I think I find very few people who listen like I do. And there are lots of creative people in the world, so I don't think that's necessary. But what I'm amazed, there's so much information there. And if you just ask someone, more than likely they're going to tell you, and they'll tell you deep, dark secrets, especially if they know you're not going to tell anyone else. You're going to keep it to yourself. And so what I've learned from listening, and one of the things that changed for me with Don Miguel Ruiz, the 4 agreements, about not taking things personally. And that allowed me to go so much deeper. When I was training to be a practitioner, what I had done up to then is I could help someone with their pain, but I was taking it on. And I talked to someone about what to do. She told me about, before I do that, to surround myself with white light. And what I've learned then is I can go in really deep with someone because I know I can get out. And that's allowed me to be, and then that evolved further to be able to listen to things that people said about me for the information, the possible guidance that might be there, but without embarrassment or judgment or shame. And
I think it's a very interesting concept, this whole idea of healers taking on the energy of the people that they're healing. And that for me was one of the reasons why I was very against being a healer, because I was just like, why would anybody want to do that? And for me, in similar ways to you, I can hear some very, I would say, powerfully destructive things that other humans do to each other. And I can leave that conversation and be complete. It didn't impact me at all. And it's one of the things where people are like, oh, how do you even live with yourself? You must be on like medication. I'm like, it doesn't actually impact me, because I think it's, for me, I'm not worried about the protection. It goes back to that relationship with God in terms of all is good.
Yeah, if you allow the energy of God, of love, to flow through you, then you're not the source.
You're not
You
the
know,
source.
you're the window through which the light is coming. And when I hear stories that are very sad, I immediately think of my own background and how privileged I was not to have had that experience that they had. I'm able to give them 100% of my focus, but then I move on, to whatever's next, because I couldn't stop and carry all of that, because it's never going to be over for them, until they decide it's over. In
And I
other words, like, go ahead.
God never asked us to be God.
No, that when I take a test and someone asks how I did, I said, perfectly human. I failed, or, I didn't get it all right. And that was a big thing, to let myself off the hook. I don't know if you've read or heard the book, Best Little Boy in the World. It was written, I actually know the man who wrote it, and he wrote it under a synonym, but it talks about growing up gay. And one of the things that he did, and I did as well, Brian, you may have done it too, is you're so afraid that someone's going to find out. So you're just the best little boy in the world, and trying to keep putting chits in the jar. So if and when your secret comes out, you've got something to weight it down.
Protection.
Yeah.
I didn't have to try, because I was the best little boy in the world.
You are.
Aren't we all?
Yeah. But what's interesting is my sister's 3.5 years younger than I am. So she was following behind me, and she was always compared to me, and for not living up to who I was and what I'd done. And I was doing it for my own protection. I wasn't. And so it did set a high standard for her, because I had set an impossibly high standard for myself.
So, Karl, how does somebody with a degree from Yale and engineering
Architecture.
end up with turquoise painted toenails, tie-dye, building mobiles in trees?
Uh-huh. First and foremost, I'm an artist. I always have loved doing art. That was in elementary school, high school, even college. That was my refuge, was art, and to get away from the other stuff where there was lots of expectation. And I like to make people think. And the tie-dye started, the first time I wore it was at the Spiritual Center in Atlanta, one of their retreats. And for a long time, I had thought men's pants were really boring. So I wanted to do something different. And it started out that way. One of the things that I've struggled with is my sense that I'm invisible. I felt that most of my life. And with the tie-dye, all of a sudden, I was finding out that I wasn't so invisible. And that, so it really changed from, fashion statement to spiritual growth. And so I continued to do that. And I started painting my nails about that same time too. And it's so funny to me. I've got, maybe a penny's worth of polish on my nails, and people react all the time. They just can't believe it. And my friends know to walk 10 feet behind me or somewhere so they can see people's reactions. But it's hilarious. And my mate, Drew, we've been together almost 35 years, who is way out there in terms of outlandishment. It took him almost 10 years before he was like okay with it. He just thought it was the most terrible thing in the world. Here he is, but I love it. And we were sitting, Brian and I were having coffee Tuesday morning, and someone there was complaining to me that I didn't have my sandals on. He couldn't see my painted nails.
Yeah, because it was really cold.
Yeah.
Hayley, one of the funniest things, because Drew, Karl's partner, is, he's just out there creating, fun out of nothing often. And they had on their refrigerator, I saw it the first time I visited their house, a cartoon of two potato heads leaving a party. And one of them was all over the ground. It was just flattened. And the partner said, "You just had to do the mashed potatoes."
Oh no.
Yeah.
Is that a cartoon he created, or?
No, it was
No.
a card someone sent us.
Yeah.
I think it's
Really?
very interesting, this idea of playfulness, because I immediately jump to, you're a playful person and you fully embrace being playful. And can you imagine a world where more adults were playful? And where we actually embraced, not only embracing this concept that God isn't a punisher and doesn't punish, but also allowing adults to be playful.
I think so many adults had art and creativity beaten out of them in elementary school because you aren't doing it right, it doesn't look good, and all this.
And art's an elective. It's not as important as math.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, the feeling is you'll never make a living out of it.
Mm-hmm.
How are you possibly going to live on what you're going to make as an artist?
Right.
So we got to do something serious. You're going to be, an engineer. You're going to be a lawyer, a doctor, or whatever.
Yeah.
They never would have said you're going to be clairvoyant.
I collect quotes, and I saw one the other day. I don't get it quite right, but they said, "Isn't it interesting that rich kids who don't have to support themselves often choose art? And what that shows is how vital creativity is."
Mm-hmm.
And I think, when you talk about that new thought, a lot of the time the new thought comes with using the senses, which is that creativity, the art, the music, that allow the sort of that opening of the new thought in and allow it to stick. I'm doing some research at the moment, and this is research that I'd done a couple of years ago, and I don't know where I got this quote, somewhere on the internet. You could probably Google this. But per day on average, children smile 400 times. They laugh 150 times. They play 4 to 6 hours and ask at least 300 questions. Per day on average, an adult smiles 15 times, 15 compared to 400. They laugh at most 6 times a day compared to kids that are 150 times. And they play for 20 minutes. And maybe ask 10 questions in a day. Maybe. I think it's more around like 3.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
But
Siri, what's the weather today?
Yeah, or how are you? But I don't really want a response.
Yeah.
And it's fascinating to me, because I think in the hero's journey, playfulness is such a critical factor. And with that comes the humor of playfulness. But, in my journey, and maybe this will resonate with the both of you too, the more that I've embraced being playful, the easier the journey got or has become.
You guys can speak to this. Karl, you just made reference that people who are wealthy, the children of wealthy people, are engaged in art because they don't need to worry about making a living. I think sometimes, Hayley, the lack of laughter and the lack of playfulness is because the pressure the person feels, to make enough money to feed their families and keep a roof over their head. Money can be freeing, allowing.
Money can be free, but I think even before then, when is your earliest memory of stop being immature?
Of stopping what?
Stop, and somebody saying to you, stop being so immature. You're not a kid, you can't do that anymore. I think that's where it starts. I think by the time we get into working, we're fully entrenched in this is what life is. It's a slog. But for me, sort of that first cutoff of playfulness and creativity was, don't be so mature. Or that person's so mature, look at them having so much fun.
Mm-hmm. And my spirit animal is a hummingbird.
Oh, wow.
Is strong and light, and that lightness, I've fought it for a long time. That's my playful, youthful, that's been my thing. But I have been told numerous times, you got to grow up, you got to be more serious. And when I try and do something serious, I don't do very well at it.
Mhm.
When I've got to find an element of fun, joy in it, and that keeps me going. But I've really had to work on relaxing into who I am, which is playful, and that I don't have to be serious. And
Well, I think I've started going to a point where I'm serious about being seriously playful. So
like
I
that.
have, you know, people sometimes, like when they meet me initially, they're like, oh, you're so serious, you're so intense. And I'm like, no, it's just because I'm really serious about my path. And if I'm not feeling it, it's not coming in.
Mhm.
So
Yep.
seriousness, and you know, is on a spectrum. You can be serious and no joy, and you can be serious about being in joy.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, yeah. No, and I think my sense is it's like wearing the tie-dye and my painted toenails, and to demonstrate that to people, to that they can give them permission to explore more of their creativity.
My God, and I bet it lightens their day no matter what, like at the very least.
Yeah.
It depends though, if the student is willing and ready, the teacher will appear. You know, Karl might teach them to be playful at the moment, but if they're not ready for it, you know, they'll go back to where they were and maybe wish they were more playful. When you mentioned seriousness, I was pondering when am I most serious? And clearly it's in moments that require it, tragedies, right? Or listening to someone talk. You know, you're giving them your full attention. And when I'm writing, I feel like I have to concentrate to really follow the thought, to bring it to a point where it's understandable. What I'm thinking I've made understandable to others. But I used to sing more. I don't know about you. My mother used to sing all day long, and I used to sing more. And you and Ray and I used to sing in the car, on trips. And we don't sing as much, and that's, so that's a little less playful.
I think this year should be the year of bringing playful back.
Yeah.
Yes.
Well,
We need
COVID.
it. We need it.
And one of my things is whistling. I think anybody that knows me knows I whistle. And if I stay in their house, they're just like, you're always whistling. And my neighbors know that I whistle. And they're like, yeah, even before they met me, they're like, yeah, we heard you whistling.
Would you whistle for me?
I can't now because I'm smiling.
I can't whistle.
I'm not a good whistler either.
I can't whistle when I'm smiling.
The noise when I whistle, I'm making noise in, not out. And don't you isn't whistling out?
Whistling for me, it's out, but I know some people that only learn on the inhale.
Yeah,
but
and even then,
if
I had counted it to grab a cab, I'd be there for a month.
I can't do that kind, like the guy whistling. I can't do that. I just like whistle a merry tune. But it is, really using. We were talking about at the beginning of the call, sort of the importance of the pelvis and the legs, but also the importance of using this creative box right here, and the sound that is generated through air, whether it's singing, whistling, speaking, or just making noises. Is incredibly playful and important. And I find, chanting is helpful in that, for me, was really helpful in opening up my idea of being playful with my voice. Because now I'm much more comfortable. I know I'm a good chanter, but now I don't know if you're familiar with the word toning, is when you just play with the different sounds that are in that region of your throat. And now I'm just like, I think I'm decent at turning.
Oh,
I don't think I'm good at singing. I mean, I wouldn't sing with other people. I sing on my own.
Mhm.
But yeah, it's a playfulness really opens up those centers of creativity.
I know when I'm in a really good mood, I skip. And that's
Like
I
you
can tell.
literally skip, or
Yeah,
skip in your step.
skipping my step.
Oh,
Yeah.
how fun.
Yep.
How
Uh,
fun.
I know I'm in a good mood then. Yeah. Laying my playful self out.
Carl, you remind me when Ray got word that he was being transferred back to New York from Atlanta, and he was getting this great salary. I said to him, "We should be skipping." So we held hands and skipped down 50th Avenue in Peachtree for a while.
Good. I love it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Fun to be a kid in this adult body.
Well,
Yeah.
in Atlanta, in the neighborhood that we lived in and Brian lived in, we were there for almost 30 years, and we started doing some yard art, and most of them were mobiles. Some of them were 30 feet tall and 20 feet across, and big stuff. And we had people all the time knock on our door saying, "We love this. It's so great." People would take pictures of it and dropped off framed pictures. They would write us notes, all sorts of things. And I don't think there's another house in the 1200 in our hoity-toity neighborhood who got that sort of attention. Well, at one point, a anonymous petition circulated in the neighborhood saying to Drew and Carl are trying to hurt property values in the neighborhood. Don't talk to them because they're mean. And the person who brought the petition to my attention was an attorney. And he said, "Carl, it's libelous what they've said in there." But we were really hurt by it because it was all giving. It was fun, uh, joyful and all that. But what my sense is unhappy people don't like to see happy people.
No.
So it wasn't happy. Very what?
Very uncomfortable for them.
Yeah. And so that's what I took it as, is that we had, it was angry people, unhappy people who had reacted that way.
How do you remain connected to your playfulness when you encounter those people that are unhappy and intimidated that you're so playful?
It's really going back inside and finding my confidence, my self-knowing, and really knowing that, and again, the whole thing of what someone says to me says a lot more about them than it does about me. And again, I've learned to listen to what people say because I think I can learn stuff that they're observing, but I've also learned to, again, not take it personally and just to.
How do you respond to them?
A lot of times I won't. I'll listen to what they have to say and say very good and not because I don't. My aim is not to throw gas on the fire. It's like right now in the world, and certainly our U.S. politics, I really want to find ways to bring us back together, not to divide us.
Mm-hmm.
And so really it's having come to an appreciation of myself, that I'm okay. That's your stuff. That's not my stuff.
And continue skipping. It's really tough. And, I commend you for being in that space, because it's a space that I am working towards too, to be able to, in that moment where you feel so triggered, to be able to just breathe, slow everything down and be like, okay, and back on your merry way. It's one of those things that's so simple, yet so tough.
Yeah.
Going back to what Carl was saying about listening to what people are saying in his hope of making connections with people who are divided from us. so much of it, I think, is just being yourself and role modeling. It's more when people see that you're happy, they want what you've got. You know, it's like that from when Harry met Sally, I'll have what she's having. When she was faking the orgasm in the diner. People want what you've got if you are happy, if you're content. And so if we encounter people who are mean or angry, and we listen for what it is that they are being triggered by, then I think we can role model for them that it's possible to listen without being defensive.
Absolutely.
I know of a handful of people who have started going to CSL, my spiritual center in Atlanta and here, after they met me and they saw how happy and calm I was. And I said, I want that. I want that. How do you get that?
Well, that's why I did that. Karl went through a 9-week Jungian training and lost 50 pounds. And I said, I'm signing up.
And Brian didn't have a wonderful time like I did.
No, our experiences were different.
Yep. Yep. Yeah. But I think that people do need that modeling. And I've come to understand that that's part of my mission, is to do that, to show people, even in the face of adversity, that you can still have a sense of humor. And
yeah, and I'm just thinking, for me, it comes back to that whole idea that God knows what he's doing.
mm-hmm.
I don't need to go in and be like, hang on, God, you clearly don't know what you're doing. Let me do this.
Yeah.
Yeah.
The reading from every morning we read from the Tao, and the reading this morning was about, don't try to interfere. Don't try to, step in, leave things as they are. Everything will develop on its own in its own time. If you interfere, you're going to wreck it. Let life be what it is.
That's how I learned patience, was coming to understand that when I was anxious about how something was going to work out, that if I go in and micromanage, I can get a result, but it's not often the one I want. If instead I do my part and then just let it work out, I'm much more likely to get the result I want.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and that seriousness. Every time we go into that place of seriousness and sternness, we are interfering.
Or are we showing empathy? You see a picture of a migrant child drowned on the beach. Clearly, we're serious when we look at it and when we tell other people about it, because it's a serious thing. It represents a serious problem. That doesn't mean that the rest of your life you have to be serious, but at that moment, being joyful and playful would be inappropriate, right?
And I think that recognizing how grateful we are for our path, for what we've been given, what we've experienced, and I think that is the counter to it, where there's a balance between this awful thing, and I'm so grateful that hasn't been my experience. That I lost in the 90s over 200 friends to AIDS. I used to start work every day reading the obituaries. About once a week, there's a friend who died, and I wrote their name on a piece of paper I kept in my desk. And one day I'd filled out both sides of the paper, 3 columns. It was 200 names. And the day I couldn't write another name, I wadded up the piece of paper and threw it away and cried. And I wish I had that paper, because I know there are people I've forgotten. But in that, I'm still alive, thankfully. And so for me, I don't think I honor those people, their lives, by going through life morose about their deaths. I think to embrace life, to live life in their honor, and because they weren't given that chance, I think is much more appropriate than just, oh, this is awful, this has been awful all my life, and we're going to get over it.
Yeah, never letting go of it, having it be baggage that you carry. And for what purpose? You're not honoring them.
No.
And you're not really honoring yourself either.
No.
Yeah. I think you're trying to demonstrate, I'm empathetic, I care.
Yeah. Like, I'm okay, right? I'm a perfect boy. I'm the best boy in the world.
And you're not being authentic because it's taken on something. When I get real serious, I can feel it in my body. It's like the blood constricts, and and I really feel like I'm stuck in my head. Feels like when I get serious, I've lost all sensation. It's just right here.
And I do believe it is in our head, because at that point we have chosen to go from our heart and say that our mind, our ego knows better and don't worry about anything else. So I think there is that decapitation that happens.
I think there's also a desire to be of use. When something bad happens and we get serious, at least my experience of it is, I want to think through, is there anything I can do, right? Practically. And that's my first check off, is just, is there anything I can do? And maybe that comes from being a middle child and codependent, but I can move on to say, no, there's nothing. I mean, let the people know how badly you feel about what happened. Offer yourself if I can do anything. But then you have to move on, because there are billions of other people who are going to have experiences that you need to be prepared for. And I think we need to be prepared. I think part of owning the God within us is knowing that it's there as a source of love to be used, not to be held tight.
Mm-hmm. And I think that's where listening is so healing, because there are a lot of people who haven't been able to tell anyone their story, and it's caught in their mind, it's rerunning all the time, it's in their head, they're possessed by it. And if you can you don't have to say a word, you don't need to comfort them, just to listen to them, I think really helps get people out. We were in New Orleans and ran into a friend we had known, and we went and had a drink or something, and we're talking, and he said that he had just the day before left an abusive relationship. And so I sat with him for about a half hour, 45 minutes, just having him breathe. And in that time, his demeanor changed. It was like he breathed it out. I don't think that totally took care of it, but it sure helped from where he was. But that listening, I think, is so important.
And
you gave him the experience of not being in dread, right? So whether or not he was as high after you left is less important than you opened the door to say, look, this is a possible feeling for you now. You don't have to maintain this horrible grief and guilt or whatever you're feeling.
A new thought. Give them a new thought.
Yeah.
the power of the breath.
Hayley, is that what you do a lot with? You're busy as a guide. Is that a lot what you do?
Breathing is probably 99.999% of the work that I do.
Is
Not
that
only
right?
for me, making sure that I'm breathing, but reintroducing breathing to people and the importance of breathing and how critical breathing is to our life. It's not just a way of oxygen. It's so important. So I have found, breathing is consistent. It is the mainstay. The way that is explained changes. But it is, every single one of my clients will tell you, what is the first thing he says? Breathe. And they all say after their first 2 sessions, I can't do this breathing thing.
Hayley, do you have people breathe through their nose or their mouth?
Both. It depends. It really depends on the client. It also depends on the state that they're coming to me in. I use different breathing techniques based on the different level of anxiety.
You do that intuitively?
When I'm working with a client, it's intuitive unless I intuitively get a kick to share my story or my experience. And I'll very clearly say, this is my story. I'm sharing my experience with you. And usually that's really to sort of build a bridge so they know that they're not alone. But all of the breathing techniques I use, I'm guided to share them. And I even learn, I'm just like, that's an interesting way, but I get how that works.
With my listening for a while as a financial advisor, and we'd get these basically cold leads, but call someone up, and in listening in a sentence or two, I figured out the person on the other line was a gay man. And so I would say something to them intimating that I was a gay man. And instead of trying to engender that commonality, and they reacted just the opposite. It's like, how do you know I'm gay? How is that in my records? Is that, why are you saying that? And so I stopped doing that. And then I found a Dolly Parton song. I think it's Them Bones. And in it, she's a witch, a seer, who's banished to the edge of town because of her witchy ways, and her daughter's taken away from her, and she senses she's near death. So telepathically, she signals her daughter, and her daughter comes, and the mother, Dolly Parton, says, I know you've got the gift too. I'm going to give you my bones, but you don't need these. They're just a prop. It's what you said. But one of the things to learn, just because you know something about someone, you don't have to tell them. And so I had to get confidence in what I'm intuiting is most likely true. I don't need to check it out with the other person to see if it's true. I'm confident here. And
and that's that knowing. And I think that was one of my biggest lessons out of last year, that it can be true and not helpful. If you're speaking the truth and it causes somebody to shut down, it's not helpful. So it comes back to, we're given the truth so we know our truth. So we can be that sort of guide, that sort of beacon of behavior for others to get the confidence to stand in their truth. But the truth doesn't always need to be said.
And I have an ongoing discussion with a friend about how do you help people? How do you tell them something that you realize that they're not seeing? And we really haven't come up with any good way to do that. And to me, that goes back to being a role model. I don't have to tell you how to do things, but you can see me do things, and maybe that gives you ideas in that. It's for them to take. It's not me forcing it on them.
And I find for me, there's 2 different sort of roles for me there. When I'm in the working and somebody is actually paying me to help them see the truth, I absolutely have moments where I'm just like, there's no way I can say this. There's no way. And I have this split-second conversation with their guides, and I'm just like, I can't say it. And they're like, say it. And I have to have that moment of like, I trust my truth and I say it. And when I deliver it, I'm always, every single time, I've been so surprised how calmly and well they've received it. I'm being like, so this energy really knows what it's talking about, not me. And then when I'm not doing that and I'm around people that aren't explicitly asking for my opinion, that's where I'm very much like, okay, I don't need to share anything, but you're welcome to your opinions.
Mhm. Yeah.
And Hayley and Karl, when you are aware of that guidance coming from outside of you, isn't that the most wonderful affirmation that we're not just randomly here, that there's something bigger than us? And sometimes I'll read things that I wrote and I'll think, I can't believe I wrote that. Where'd that come from? Huh? And I totally give it to God, whatever word we use. I turn it all over. I really believe that we're vessels, and we can either close down or we can open up. And but and you can't prove it to people. This is you're arguing with people about, or discussing with people about, is there afterlife? Is there God? Is there whatever? And that's particularly interesting to me now, is because we're heading out tomorrow for my sister's celebration of life, and the question of afterlife came up for me after she died. But I can't deny the number of experiences I've had in my life where there's a voice, an intuition, whatever we call it, that tells me to do exactly what needs to be done.
I became aware of my intuition driving, and I'd be driving down the road, and something inside of me would say change lanes or stay in this lane or that. And a lot of the time, initially I wouldn't do it, and then I would shortly find out why I'd been given that. And so now I trust that voice, and in trusting it there, I've been able to develop it and hear it more often.
Yeah.
When I hear that voice while driving, it's Ray.
Yeah.
Go in that lane. Go in this lane. If you go, hurry up.
Yeah.
Well, gentlemen, on that note, we do have 2 minutes left for our time together. Is there anything that, for you, Karl, is more important for you to sort of foster? And I know we only have 2 minutes in this sort of next 6 months of the 2022.
One certainly is to stay healthy. And then really, again, I feel very drawn to, what do I do to help draw people back together so we can have a conversation? And Bill Maher a couple weeks ago said, just like each other, start there. And there's so much division, and it's like you find out something about who someone supports, and you load them up with all preconceived notions that may or may not be true. And I don't like that. Nor do I like people yelling at me, because I like the wrong person, or.
Right.
So
I'd
it's really-
imagine blue toenails is a way better way of entering into that liking each other.
Yeah.
It's more neutral.
There's someone, I walk the dog around our neighborhood every morning, and there's a woman who's on the opposite team, as it were, but we have a great time, and she loves my painted toenails, and so we have fun, and we just don't talk about the other.
Yeah. Lovely. Thank you so much for your time, Karl. It was such a joy.
Likewise. Thank you.
Thank you, Brian.
Thank you, Karl.
I hope you all have a great week,
Yes.
year, month, all of it. I hope it's all great.
Thank you.
Good.
Here's to
Thank you.
being
Thank you.
playful.
Yes.
Bye-bye.
I'll see you both.
Thank you all.